Well, I want to welcome everyone to this panel discussion on constitutions in uncertain times. My name is Francois Dubois. I'm a professor here at Leicester Law School, and I will be chairing the session today. And I want to welcome everybody who's in the room and also everybody who's joining us online today. And I want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Norman Riad, who is the founder and convener of the Global South Network, who have organized today's event. Our session is funded by a grant from the Economic and Social Research Council Impact Accelerator account that the university received, and it aims to examine and evaluate issues relating to constitutional law and politics in South Asia, which I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody here is one of the important regions of the Global South and hosts hundreds of languages, geographically important places, and also countries with post-colonial, federal, and unitary constitutions. Now, South Asian constitutions are important and interesting case studies to develop our understanding of how constitutions work, how they are made, how they evolve, and how they survive in uncertain times. On the one hand, currently Afghanistan has no constitution, hardly any human rights, but it does seem to have a state that functions in some way or other. On the other hand, countries like Nepal and Bhutan and Pakistan have experienced constitutional transformations, different constitutions. And then again, at the same time, there are countries like Bangladesh and India, where the constitutions have somehow survived and evolved over time. All these countries face comparable issues, which include, but are not limited to, questions like judicial independence, the rule of law, human rights violations, and threats to democracy. And this gives us important questions about the place and role of constitutions. Questions such as whether constitutions really matter, and whether in these uncertain times it is the constitutions, or rather that shape society, or rather the social context that shape the constitutions. And so questions like these are going to animate our discussion today. And we are fortunate to have 4 speakers who will be addressing us. We'll start with a presentation by Professor Faizan Mustafa, who's the Vice Chancellor of the Chandri National Law University in India. And he will speak to us about diversity management under the Indian Constitution. Then we will move on to a presentation by Dr. Itashamul Bari, who is the Deputy Head for Research at Thomas More Law School in the Australian Catholic University. And he will speak about the authoritarian playbook for subverting judicial independence, and talking about the case of Bangladesh. And that will be followed by a presentation from Professor David Pimentel, who is at the University of Idaho at the US, and he will speak about judicial independence and the rule of law, the elusive objectives in transitional justice in Nepal. And then finally, Dr. Norman Riad here from Leicester Law School will talk about judicial leaders in uncertain times, lessons from Pakistan. Each speaker will have between 10 and 15 minutes to speak, and that will in total give us about an hour of presentations and leave about half an hour for questions and answers at the end. I'm afraid we will have to stick to our timetable very strictly because the room is booked for another session immediately when we end. So if I'm a little bit strict with the speakers, please understand and forgive me for that particular reason. I will introduce the speakers in a little more detail as we start. So our first speaker is Faizan Mustafa, who sits here next to me, who is an Indian academic and legal scholar. And as I mentioned, he is currently the Vice Chancellor of Chandri National Law University in Patna, India. But he has a very long and distinguished history of leading law institutions. He's a former vice chancellor of the NLU in Hyderabad and founded the NLU in Odisha, India. So someone with a long and distinguished career in legal scholarship. And I invite Professor Mustafa to speak to us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really delighted and honored in speaking to this August gathering, and thank you very much, Noman. I would largely speak on India, but just to set the ball rolling, just make in another minute or so few references to other South Asian constitutions, for the simple reason that our country was partitioned on the question of minority rights. There was a partition in the name of religion, and the countries which got partitioned eventually became religious states. And as you rightly said, Mr. President, that we have a stable constitution. So the number of amendments have been quite in United States, but India's of diversity also has lessons for our neighboring countries. So I just want to quote my father of nation, Gandhiji, saying that a claim of a civilization depends on the treatment it extends to minority rights. And I believe in India, many people have now started looking at the whole question of diversity and the minority rights, not from the angle of communalism and secularism, but from the angle of democracy. After all, they are all our citizens, and they are entitled to non-discrimination rights. In a country where you had partition and the partitioned states became theocracies, we were still drafting our constitution. And as you know, it took about 3 years or so. So we could have also gone their way. And it was really the foresight of founders of Indian Republic opted for a secular, modern, and liberal democracy. So as you look at Nepal, for many decades, it was a Hindu state. And then you look at Bhutan, and they declared Buddhism to be the spiritual heritage. We are a Hindu majority state. Many say that we are on our way to become a Hindu Rashtra. The Supreme Court has been consistently saying that secularism is the basic structure of the Constitution, and anything which is the basic structure of the Constitution, even the Parliament cannot, by way of an amendment, remove that provision of that kind of thinking of the Constitution. In fact, in a Hindu majority country, I am very pleased to say this, that even the Hindu god Lord Ram had to go to the court of law to claim a temple. There may be, academic criticism about that judgment. For that matter, all judgments are subject to academia's critique. As Lord Denning in this very country said that court higher than House of Lords, because you didn't have Supreme Court at that point of time, is the law quarterly review. So we are entitled to the criticism of all our judgments. But if you look at Sri Lanka, where Buddhism has a prominent place, or Maldives, where foreigners can practice their religion only in private, our management of a diversity is something one can be very proud of. And in the Constituent Assembly, post-partition, we had a minority rights group which was looking at what kind of rights are to be given to minorities. We have some extreme rightist individuals and groups. So one member in the Constituent Assembly, namely Mahavir Tyagi, said, let us wait and see what rights Pakistan, the undivided Pakistan, because you didn't have Bangladesh at that point of time, is going to give to its minorities, and similar rights we would give to our minorities in India. But the senior elements in the Constituent Assembly condemned Mahavir Tyagi, and that said that India's case of minority rights has nothing to do with Pakistan. And we believe that our mission is to satisfy. Sardar Patel was the head of that committee. Our mission is to satisfy every interest and safeguard the interest of all minorities to their satisfaction. And I would also like to just read one or two lines from Kerala Education Bill judgment of Supreme Court, where Justice Iyer said that the accepted notion was that sovereigns were entitled to impose their own religion on their subjects, and those who did not conform to it could be dealt with as traitors. This has been the history of this continent. It was this notion that was responsible during the 16th and 17th centuries for numerous wars between the nations and for civil wars in the continent of Europe. And it was only laterly that it came to be recognized that freedom of religion is not incompatible with good citizenship and loyalty to the state, and that all progressive societies should respect the religious beliefs of their minorities. And it is this concept that is embodied in Articles 25, 26, 29, and 30 of Indian Constitution. So as you look at Article 29, it is saying any section of Indian citizens which has a distinct language, script, or culture of its own would have a right to conserve the same. And as you can see that this is a right available to everybody. And then in Article 30, we specifically say that whether you are a religious minority or you are a linguistic minority, you would have a right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. And I'm going to tell you that our Supreme Court has said that the crucial expression in this article is of their choice. And it is within the powers of the minorities to expend their choice as much as they want. So if they want to set up an IIT, they can do it. If they want to set up a national law university, they can do it. And interestingly, what is the meaning of this word education institution? Our courts have very liberally interpreted them and said it would include education at every level and it would include a university. As you look at the minority protection globally, generally this right would be available to minorities to set up their educational institutions, but generally of schools, type of schools, junior level institutions, and private. But our Article 30 very clearly says that a state will not, in granting aid to educational institutions, would discriminate against an educational institution which is under the management of the minority. And this morning itself, I just emailed to Noman, long list which goes in 854 pages of the educational institutions of the minorities which have been granted that recognition by a new commission which has been set up in India in 2005, what is said to be National Commission for National Education Institutions Commission, which gives them the recognition that you are a minority institution. And thousands of institutions are there, and many of them are aided institutions. I come from a university, where I studied and on whose staff I am. Right now, I'm on a deputation at a national law university. This is a huge university, 100% aided by the government of India, and their annual grant goes to about 1,400 crores, which is a very, very big amount by any standards. Then we also say in Article 350 that we can have commissions for the instruction of education in mother tongue. Article 350A says that you have to give the primary education in the mother tongue. And then Supreme Court has also said, how do you define minorities? In fact, there have been some debates whether Muslims are a minority. One High Court judge at one point of time in Allahabad said that unless you have a threat of extinction, you are not a minority. We have very, very liberally defined the expression minority. We say minorities are to be defined at the provincial level, and anyone who is less than 50% is a minority. So if you are a 49.9%, still you are a minority. And since the Constitution is talking of two kinds of minorities, religious and linguistic, even the Hindu community is a religious minority in 7 or 8 states and union territories or centrally administered territories. And in the rest of the country, they are linguistic minorities. So a Tamil Brahmin in UP can set up a linguistic minority institution, or a upper caste Hindu of North in South can set up a linguistic minority institution. So it's just like disability, that where you are at a particular point of time, and if you are less than 50%, you are a minority. We have not yet adopted the powerlessness test, that maybe you are a majority in a society, but still you are a minority if you are powerless in the structure of the state. So what I'm trying to say, that as you look at some of the other countries like Pakistan, the Quran and Sunnah are proclaimed as supreme law of land. Only a Muslim would occupy the constitutional positions. Even non-Muslim judges take oath in the name of Allah. Then you have a very repressive blasphemy provision. Bangladesh is more liberal than Pakistan. Secularism in the 71 constitution was said to be one of the four fundamental principles, but then there was an amendment which removed this provision and made state religion, Islam as a state religion in 1988. But then Bangladesh Supreme Court, also borrowing from Indian Supreme Court, restored secularism as one of the features in their constitution. Similarly, in Sri Lanka, I already told you that Buddha Sasana is the spiritual heritage of that country. But Sri Lankan constitution is by and large similar to Indian constitution. Bhutan also, I said, Dzongkha is the national language of Bhutan, and then Buddhism is the state religion. In Maldives also, I said that foreigners can practice their religion, but only privately. In India, on the other hand, as you look, I'm skipping Afghanistan because the new government is not really accepting this constitution. One can have problems even with this constitution because it says that no law contrary to beliefs or provisions of sacred religion of Islam can be law. And then it also says that all practices which are conflicting with Islamic principles are to be removed. And then it also says the provisions of adherence to the fundamentals of sacred religion of Islam and regime of Islamic Republic cannot be amended. So this is a kind of a basic structure. As you come back to India, there has been really a lot of debate around the rights of the minority education institutions. In fact, after Article 14 and Article 21, which are right to life and right to equality, the maximum time of our constitutional court was occupied by debates on minority education rights. Most of these cases which have gone to courts were taken by the Christian minority institutions. So initially there was a debate, are we going to give this protection to a number of pre-constitution institutions? Some of the greatest minority institutions like the St. Stephen's College or St. Xavier's are pro-minority institution, are the pre-constitution minority institutions. And the state has said that we will give this right only to the post-minority institutions. And the Supreme Court has said no, there is nothing in Article 30 which says that the protection is to be confined just to institutions post-1950, which I think expanded the ambit of Article 13. And then the court also said that of their choice would basically mean of their choice. An education institution would mean a university. They can set up a university of their choice. There has been a debate that the state has powers to regulate education. We have a University Grants Commission, which is a central body, and regulation is to be permitted. The Supreme Court has consistently said that you cannot give aid with such conditions which will annihilate or destroy the minority character of an institution. And any regulation which does that is unconstitutional. Similarly, you can come up only with such regulations which will make that institution conducive to the minority rights and an excellent minority institution. The courts have also said that Article 30 is part of the basic structure, and if you try to dilute the spirit of Article 30, then it would be a violation of a constitutional pact which the framers of the Constitution have made with the Constitution. So they have right to choose their own governing body, right to choose teachers, right to admit students of their choice. They can have the right to, regulate their fee. Of course, minorities don't have the right to maladminister their institutions. So if there is a maladministration, then the state would definitely come in. And the courts have also said that minorities may reserve seats for the members of the minority, which has set up that institution. So in an aided state institution, you cannot have any reservation on the basis of religion. But in the minority institution, even though it may be 100% aided, you can have a reservation for that particular minority. I could not make it in January when I was scheduled to come here because a very big case was heard by the Supreme Court on this article by a 7-judge bench. Now, this is one bad case in our otherwise liberal jurisprudence. So this university was set up way back in 1920. It started as a college in 1875. And then the government tried, there was some violence. The vice chancellor was assaulted. So the government intervened and they said that all the governing body members would be nominated by the government. So some public interest litigation was filed in 1968, and they said that our right to administer has been violated. The court said, well, you will have a right to administer if you have established that institution. And they looked at the 1920 Act, which was passed by the Imperial Legislative Body, and they said that this act does not explicitly say that the university was established by Muslims. Maybe they made effort and maybe they donated their properties, maybe they collected the 30 lakh, 3 million funds which the British government at that time had asked. But the ultimate authority is with the Lord Rector, who was the Governor General Viceroy of India at that point of time, and he could nullify any decision of your governing bodies. So there was some amendment in 1981 to restore that position. That amendment was challenged, and one of the High Court struck down that amendment. Then I went to the Supreme Court and I said, your judgment is wrong because the university was condemned unheard. It was not a party in 1968 decision. And since it is a 5-judge bench judgment, let a 7-judge bench reconsider its own judgment. And since that matter was started, I went to the court that you review your judgment in 2005 when I was the registrar. So I was asked to be there to assist the court. So I was helping the lawyers. I think this is going to be a big judgment yet again because the government has opposed the minority character. In 2005, they had supported because you had a UPA government. The current government believes that the 68 judgment was right. So maybe in next 2 or 3 months, we are going to have one big judgment from the Supreme Court on this issue. Our Prime Minister has been saying that inclusiveness and cultural diversity is the power and strength of India. Democracy, democracy and diversity have the potential to realize all the dreams of the country. So I believe that this is one of our greatest strength, and our neighboring countries should try to follow the Indian model. We don't even believe in the American melting pot theory. We believe rather in the salad bowl theory, so that the distinctive identities of all communities are preserved. Jai Hind, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Mustafa. That was fascinating. So we move on then to our second speaker, Dr. Eshtamul Lari, who is a senior lecturer in law at the Australian Catholic University in Melbourne. It's Thomas More Law School. Long and distinguished record of scholarship, publication, widely recognized legal scholar with a long history of and experience also at various Australian universities. And just as one example of the international recognition of his work, his expertise was called upon by the chair rapporteur of the UN Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances for an expert consultation at the 131st session of the United Nations Working Group on enforced disappearances. So I now invite Dr. Bari to talk to us about the authoritarian playbook for subverting judicial independence, the case for Bangladesh. And it's again 15 minutes maximum. Dr. Bari.
Thank you, Professor Devoy, for that very warm welcome. So the independence of judiciary is considered to be an indispensable feature of any democratic society proclaiming the rule of law, as it enables basically the courts to interpret and apply the law independently and impartially, thereby ensuring that the supremacy of law over the arbitrary exercise of power, either the executive or legislature, and thereby guaranteeing the equal protection of law to all people without exception. Now, inextricably linked with the concept of independence of judiciary of the judges to interpret and apply the law in an impartial manner are the procedures concerning their appointment and security of tenure. Because a transparent method of appointment of judges, which obviates the possibility of the intrusion of extraneous considerations into the process, enables judges to decide cases without feeling beholden to the appointing authority, while the guarantee of security of tenure permits judges to make decisions without the apprehension of suffering personally as a result of such decision making. Now, when the South Asian nation of Bangladesh achieved its independence on 16th of December 1971, following a 9-month-long brutal war of independence with Pakistan, the founding fathers of the country aspired to establish a democratic society in which the judiciary will operate independently to ensure the observance of the rule of law and the enforcement of the fundamental rights of individuals. Now, since an independent judiciary is an essential feature of any democratic society, proclaiming the rule of law and upholding fundamental liberties of individuals, it is imperative to secure the position of the judiciary in the Constitution, which is the supreme law of a nation. Now, although the framers of the Constitution of Bangladesh did not expressly vest the judicial power of the Republic in the judiciary, they nevertheless sought to make the principle of independence of the judiciary a cornerstone in the scheme of the Constitution. To this end, reference can be made, for instance, to the provisions contained in Articles 22 and 94, Clause 4 of the Constitution. So, Article 22, in the first instance, stipulates that the state shall ensure the separation of the judiciary from the executive organs of the state, while Article 94, Clause 4 provides that subject to the provisions of the Constitution, the Chief Justice and other judges shall be independent in the exercise of the judicial functions. So the Constitution not only recognizes the necessity to safeguard the independence of the judiciary as a whole, but crucially, it also seeks to maintain the individual independence of the judges. Furthermore, the Supreme Court of Bangladesh, in the seminal 1989 case of Anwar Hossain Chaudhry and others versus Bangladesh, recognized the principle of independence of judiciary as being one of the basic structures or features of the Constitution. That is one of the structural pillars on which the constitutional edifice is built upon, and which, if altered, will cause the entire edifice to crumble. So the principle of independence of judiciary, as guaranteed by the Constitution, has been placed beyond the powers of the transient majority in the Parliament to wipe out by the amendatory process. Now, let me just briefly shed some light on the manner in which the Constitution of Bangladesh seeks to give effect to the ideal of safeguarding the independence of the judiciary. Now, a suitable method of appointment of judges involving a body of judicial character, wherein members of the judiciary will constitute the majority, as for instance stipulated by the Constitution of Pakistan of 1973, enables judges to decide cases according to their oath of office without submitting to any kind of external pressures. However, notwithstanding the effectiveness of such a method of appointment, the Constitution of Bangladesh has not been so far amended to incorporate a similar kind of method of appointment of the judges of the Supreme Court, which is composed of two divisions, namely the Appellate Division and the High Court Division. Rather, the Constitution of Bangladesh entrusts the executive with the authority to appoint judges of the superior courts, thereby allowing wide scope for appointment of judges on extraneous considerations. The absence, consequently, of any provision in the Constitution, either obligating the President to consult a selection committee consisting, for instance, the senior judges of the judiciary for the appointment of the Chief Justice of Bangladesh, who is the head of the judiciary, or the absence of any provision stipulating any qualification for the appointment of the Chief Justice, led to the development of a convention of appointing the senior most judge of the Appellate Division, which is the higher division of the Supreme Court, as the Chief Justice. The idea was to ensure that extraneous considerations did not play any part in making such a pivotal appointment. And a similar convention of appointing the senior most judges of the High Court Division, which is the lower division of the Supreme Court, as judges of the Appellate Division, was also developed to act as a check against patronage appointments. Finally, although there exists a constitutional obligation to consult the Chief Justice when appointing regular judges of the High Court Division, there is an absence of such an obligation when it comes to appointment of additional judges of the High Court Division for a period of 2 years under Article 98 of the Constitution. Now, the weaknesses of the Constitution provisions concerning the appointment of the judges of the superior judiciary in Bangladesh have particularly allowed the current government of Bangladesh Awami League to politicize the bench, thereby undermining the reputation of the judiciary in the eyes of the litigants as a fair and impartial arbitrator of disputes. For instance, the current Awami League government, which has ruled the country uninterruptedly for the past 15 years, has violated the principle of seniority in appointing the Chief Justice on 4 occasions. First in December 2009, second in September 2010, third in February 2018, and finally 2 years back in December 2021. Now, it should be stressed here that these violations of the principle of seniority in appointing the Chief Justice not only causes injustice to the superseded judge by frustrating his legitimate expectation of being appointed to the highest judicial office of the nation, but it also makes room for further injustices likely to be meted out in the future against litigants, particularly in cases where the government is a party. And this has the disastrous impact of making the highly dignified and prestigious office of the Chief Justice controversial and of lowering public confidence in the highest court. Now, it is difficult to calculate the aggregate amount of evil that is inflicted on the community by such a decision to violate the convention of seniority. Furthermore, if the superseded judges resign in protest or take leave until retirement, as had occurred when Justice Wahab Mia had resigned from office in February 2018 as a mark of protest upon being superseded by the Awami League government for appointment as Chief Justice, the country was then deprived of the services of a senior, experienced, and competent judge. Now, in terms of the appointment of judges of the Appellate Division of the Supreme Court, the current Awami League regime has so far contravened the principle of seniority on 13 occasions in elevating judges of the High Court Division to the Appellate Division. Some of these appointees were elevated to the Appellate Division in supersession of an astounding 38 senior judges of the High Court Division. Furthermore, these judges were elevated to the Appellate Division not because of their records as judges of the High Court Division, but rather on political considerations. So it does not come as a surprise when one of these judges elevated to the Appellate Division in violation of the principle of seniority, while addressing a discussion in August last year, remarked that judges of the Supreme Court are oath-bound politicians. Then, since assuming office in January 2009, the Awami League regime has so far appointed approximately 100 judges to the High Court Division. But again, instead of merit, the criteria for appointment of these judges to the High Court Division has in most cases been allegiance to the regime. For instance, out of the 17 judges who received appointment to the High Court Division in April 2010 as additional judges, 9 acquired a third class in their LLB exams, while 13 had either third class or divisions in more than one of the public exams in their lives. Furthermore, several of these judges were actively involved with the Bangladesh Awami League Lawyers Association, a platform of pro-government lawyers, and they did not have any experience of practicing in the appellate division of the Supreme Court. In addition to these predicaments, and perhaps more damningly, 2 of these 17 judges are accused of committing very serious offenses in the past. One of them is a prime accused in a case concerning murder, while the other was involved in vandalism that took place on the Supreme Court premises in November 2006. In fact, he was photographed by leading newspapers of the country, kicking the door of the office of the Chief Justice. Now, despite the widespread outcry concerning the appointment of these judges, these controversial judges, the government has nevertheless continued to appoint judges on the basis of political considerations. And these patronage appointments even led a ruling party MP to once remark, and I quote, that these individuals do not have the skills to become upper division clerk, yet they're made judges, unquote. Now, secondly, the Constitution of Bangladesh, as amended by the Fifth Amendment of 1979, stipulated that a judge of the Supreme Court could only be removed from office by the President on the recommendation of the Supreme Judicial Council, which was to be composed of the Chief Justice and the next 2 senior judges of the Supreme Court, following an inquiry to determine whether the judge in question had ceased to be capable of properly performing the functions of his office by reason of either physical or mental incapacity, or he had been guilty of gross misconduct. Now, this method of removal of judges was very much in line with the international norms concerning judicial independence, such as the Latimer House Guidelines for the Commonwealth of 1998. Furthermore, since the Constitution itself confined the membership of the Supreme Judicial Council to the Chief Justice and the senior judges, and did not allow for representation of the executive branch, it basically obviated the possibility for the executive to unduly influence the functioning of the Supreme Judicial Council, thereby maintaining the fairness of the processes. But the Awami League regime dispensed with this method of removal of the judges of the Supreme Court by persuading the Parliament to pass the Constitutional 16th Amendment Act in September 2014, only 7 months after conducting a one-sided and voterless general election. And this new amendment vested the power to remove the judges of the Supreme Court in the Parliament, thereby making it extremely convenient for an all-powerful executive to remove any judge of the Supreme Court who drew its ire for delivering justice in a fearless and impartial manner in a dispute where the government was a party. Because in the absence of an actual opposition in the parliament that emerged out of the sham 2014 election remained firmly under the thumb of the government. And this argument that the 16th Amendment undermined the independence of the judiciary by granting the executive the authority to sack the judges of the Supreme Court through a subservient parliament gains further momentum by reference to the anti-defection provision that is contained in Article 70 of the Constitution, which obliges MPs to defer to the arbitrary directives of the government when exercising the potential power of removing a judge of the court. Accordingly, when this amendment was challenged, both the divisions of the Supreme Court duly struck down it for being ultra vires the Constitution. However, the Chief Justice of the country, in declaring this judgment in ultra vires, attributed this government's attempt to diminish the independence of the judiciary to its greed for power, and this incensed the regime. As soon as the judgment was published, Prime Minister Hasina, her cabinet, and parliamentary colleagues began using unparliamentary language, questioning the Chief Justice's character, integrity, and propriety in declaring the 16th Amendment ultra vires the Constitution. The Chief Justice was not only forced to go on leave, but the regime took the unprecedented step of instituting 11 charges against him, including money laundering, financial irregularities, corruption, and moral turpitude. And it is owing to such persecution that the Chief Justice prematurely resigned from his office in November 2017. And since then, he has been living in exile, first in the US and now in Canada, where he has sought asylum. And this unceremonious ouster of the Chief Justice has had the impact of unduly curtailing the competence of the judiciary to impartially adjudicate cases where the executive is a party, and to act as a final bulwark against executive encroachment on the liberty of individuals. So it is evident that through these measures, the Awami League regime has subverted the independence of the judiciary, thereby demolishing one of the structural pillars on which the Bangladeshi constitutional edifice is built, and realizing in the process the regime's aspiration of becoming the unlimited master of the state. Accordingly, it is absolutely imperative to adopt concrete measures for restoring the independence of the judiciary. First, an amendment should be introduced to the Constitution, among other things, investing an independent, effective, and meaningful Supreme Judicial Council, Supreme Judicial Commission, wherein members of the judiciary will constitute a majority, with the responsibility of selecting and recommending judges for appointment, thereby maintaining its integrity and fairness. Secondly, it is imperative that the government no longer seeks to undermine the judiciary by persecuting those judges who seek to uphold the rule of law and the fundamental human rights of individuals in performance of their constitutional responsibilities. Because impairing the independence of the judiciary to ensure the survival of the government's absolutist project is fundamentally contradictory to the democratic ideals on Bangladesh was founded, as is evident from the third preamble paragraph of the Constitution, that it shall be a fundamental aim of the state to realize through the democratic process a society free from exploitation, a society in which the rule of law, fundamental human rights and freedom will be secured for all citizens. Thank you very much, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Bari. That was really fascinating to hear. Our next speaker is David Pimentel, who's a professor of law at the University of Idaho in the USA. And his presentation is going to be provided via a recording, which Norman is just seeking to start here. But in the meantime, by way of introducing him, I can mention that he has, over a very long period of time, been involved with various projects aiming at instituting, reinstituting, in some cases, judicial independence and the rule of law in post-conflict circumstances, especially in Eastern and Central Europe. And has taught and lectured widely on these particular topics in universities across the world and across the United States. And so is truly an expert on judicial independence and the rule of law. And so we welcome Professor Pimentel's presentation.
To have a chance to speak to you today on judicial independence and the rule of law, particularly as it applies to Nepal. I had a chance to do some research and work consulting and advising in the constitutional drafting process in Nepal a dozen years ago. I have not done more recent work in Nepal. I'm relying today on excellent work by Professor Renee Jeffrey and Dr. Bikram Timulsina, whose work I recommend to you. If you want more detail and up-to-date information, please look at what they are producing. It's excellent, excellent work. Let me share my screen and we'll move forward with what I have. I don't have a lot of time here. I would love to go through the history of the Constitution in Nepal, the various constitutions in Nepal. I have kind of a checkered history in the latter part of the 20th century, going through different constitutions with limited success at achieving any kind of meaningful rule of law. The interim constitution in 2007, after the monarchy came down, was designed to be a transitional constitution. It was supposed to last only a couple of years. In fact, it was 7 or 8 years, I guess, before we finally got a constitution in Nepal in 2015. But the judiciary over this entire period has been characterized by corruption, dysfunction, inefficiency, and only rarely did the courts challenge the monarch's power, and the monarch did not obviously respond positively on the rare occasions when that happened. In the latest constitutional drafting process, the Maoist influence on that process was particularly problematic for the principle of judicial independence. Almost 30% of the Constituent Assembly seats were held by the Maoists, and so they claimed a leadership role in constitutional drafting. They were the largest party in the Assembly. And I had a chance to meet with members of the Constitutional Drafting Commission and representatives from the Maoist Party to try and understand what they were saying. They called for a judiciary to be governed by a special committee of the legislature. They felt the judiciary needed to be independent of the executive, and that the best way to achieve independence was to make the judiciary subject to democratically elected parliament, and that this was essential for a sound functioning judiciary. Now this, to a Westerner like me, this seemed like the opposite of judicial independence, to make the courts beholden entirely to the legislature, a political branch of government. That doesn't sound like independence at all. But ultimately, the 2015 Constitution created a judiciary with some structural separation of powers from the legislature. The Maoist proposal was not ultimately adopted. But as I tried to understand where they were coming from, I was exploring a little bit the issues of cultural sources and influences, historical sources and influences for the role of the judiciary. In the common law culture that I come from, being an American, we see judges as playing a very critical role in protecting the people against the abuses of the king. Ever since 1215 and the signing of Magna Carta, there were limits on the powers of the king, and who protected the people from the king? It was the judges. And so we have insisted in common law cultures a very strongly empowered judiciary. They have power to make law through the common law process and stare decisis. And we want to empower judges. Only then can we trust them to perform their role to protect us from the king. Now, in communist and socialist culture, the mindset is completely different, and this is due simply to ideological reasons. Why are do the people need to be protected from? Well, it's not the king, it's not political power. They need to be protected from economic power. They need to be protected from the capitalist. These are core principles in Das Kapital that and the Communist Manifesto, suggesting that the working classes, the people, need to be protected. And who protects them? Well, it's the party, it's the government in control of the Communist Party that protects the people. And so when a case comes up, an important case comes up, judges in these systems historically would expect to get a telephone call from the party headquarters telling them how to rule in the case. And it sounds like a terrible corruption of judicial independence from a common law perspective. But from this perspective, of course, who else would you trust to act in the best interest of the people? Not some individual judge exercising independence, but the party that's looking out for the people as a whole. Interesting contrast, even in the West, between England and France. And this is due not to ideological reasons, but simply historical reasons, creating a different legal culture. In pre-revolutionary France, they hated the judges. The judges carried out the agenda of the king, and they were corrupt, and they exploited the people. So with liberty leading the people here, the courts had defended the monarchy against the revolutionaries. And so the French insisted on disempowering judges. They did not want judges to have a lot of power, to have a lot of ability to make law or administer justice. They just didn't trust judges the way we did in a common law regime. So the French view was, if you give the judges too much independence, they're going to do the wrong thing. Whereas in the common law tradition, we think you need to give them that much independence so they will feel free to do the right thing. So this is one of the fundamental problems of judicial independence. Independence emboldens judges to act without fear of consequences. That's a good thing if the judges want to do good things, but it's a terrible thing if you have unethical or corrupt judges. In an attempt to illustrate this, I created this this graphical depiction suggesting that every judge in every system has some endowment of judicial integrity, the desire to do the right thing, and of judicial courage, which is the courage to make a decision without fear of consequences. And so you could put everyone into one of these four categories. And the heroes are those with high integrity and high courage, and those are the judges that we admire and that we want in our system. People may try to intimidate them, but they will stand up and do the right thing anyway because they're founded on principle and they have high integrity. There may be judges with high integrity but low courage. They want to do the right thing, but they're afraid, right? They may be threatened. They may be concerned about their career or their safety or the safety of their family. These individuals may be afraid to do the right thing and vulnerable despite their desire to do the right thing. Below that, in quadrant C, down below here, are those that are corruptible. These are low integrity, low courage judges, easy to bribe, easy to influence. Their judicial decisions are for sale. And worst of all are the monsters. These are individuals with high courage but low integrity, and they will do the corrupt thing no matter how much they may be held accountable. We can threaten them with consequences for their ethical breaches. And they'll say, do your worst. I'm not afraid of you, right? They have a high courage but low integrity. So if we give a lot of judicial independence to judges, that may embolden them to do the right thing. If your judges are in quadrant B, then you want strong judicial independence protections to embolden them. They can't be fired. Their salary can't be reduced. They have life tenure. These sorts of protections of judicial independence will help turn them into heroes, and that's a good thing, but only if we have judges with high integrity. If we have judges with low integrity, then if we give them judicial independence, we insulate them from consequences for their decisions, we may just turn them into monsters. Okay, and if you're carrying out a judicial reform initiative, which is what I've done a lot in my career, you have to get rid of the monsters. You can't reform them. And in Bosnia, after the war, I was a part of a judicial restructuring effort where we dismissed all of the judges in the entire country in an effort to make a clean sweep of it and establish a new judiciary with higher expectations for judicial integrity. So if you have judges in the lower quadrants, you may need to impose a strict regime for disciplining judges who take bribes or engage in corruption, or who follow political imperatives dictated by political forces. If we do that, we may encourage them to move from C to B, right? These are judges with low courage. You threaten them with prosecution, you threaten them with dismissal, and they may decide not to take that bribe, and they may decide to do the right thing because they're afraid of consequences. And we can move judges from C to B, but not from D to A, because those judges have too much courage. They don't care. Threaten me all you want with discipline, threaten me with dismissal. I'm going to carry out my corrupt agenda anyway. So judicial independence is useful for the rule of law if you have judges in the upper two quadrants here, and ultimately your judicial reform trajectory follows kind of a clockwise pattern here. Only after you've got judges with integrity do you want to give them the protection of judicial independence. So independence is always going to be balanced against accountability, one coming at the expense of the other, and we are always confronted with the difficulty about how we should hold them accountable, the degree to which we should hold them accountable, knowing that it comes at the expense of independence. And what's the right balance? Well, some have attempted to talk about the best practices, what best practices is, or what's the ideal balance. Well, I have argued consistently in my scholarship that it depends very much on the place you are, right? The legal tradition there, the history and culture there. Is there a history and culture of corruption? And the role and state of the judges. What quadrants are they in? Are these judges showing integrity? If so, then maybe we strike the balance in favor of judicial independence. Of course, there are a couple of kinds of judicial independence, the independence of the whole judicial branch. So this is a separation of powers sorts of question. And then we also talk about the individual decisional independence. This is the judicial courage that I'm talking about earlier. Are judges emboldened enough to make these decisions? Ultimately, in Nepal, they adopted a judicial appointment process that was designed to help depoliticize the judiciary a little bit, Critics have said it didn't go far enough. It created a constitutional council and a judicial council that recommended candidates for judicial appointment. But those councils are dominated by political actors or by their appointees, and that's potentially problematic. If people want to be appointed to a judgeship in Nepal, they may find themselves ingratiating themselves or currying favor with political actors, and that's not a healthy dynamic. Also, Nepal did not give life tenure to judges. They serve 6-year terms, and and there's mandatory retirement at age 65. So we see a lot of vacancies coming up, and that means a lot of people jockeying for those positions. We also saw a really unfortunate exercise of political power against the judiciary in 2017. Unhappy with the decisions of Chief Justice Karki, the impeachment charges were registered against her by the House of Representatives in 2017, and it was not pretty clear to anybody observer that this was not because she was corrupt in any way, but because they were unhappy with her decisions, specifically on amnesty and the transitional justice law at the time, which she resisted the political priority of the government in power on this, and they succeeded in bringing the charges and suspending her effectively from doing her job until her mandatory retirement came, and that's a tremendous blow to judicial independence. On the other hand, if we're concerned about the state of judicial independence, she showed tremendous judicial courage. She knew what she was doing was unpopular with the political establishment, and she did it anyway. And that would suggest that there's still some judicial independence being exercised within this legal culture, within this legal tradition. That's an encouraging sign, right? She issued these rulings on amnesty and impunity that were unpopular with the ruling government, saying that they violated international humanitarian law, that they violated the Constitution. Unfortunately, the 2015 ruling on this subject has been ignored and disregarded to a large degree. We've got a new transitional justice bill introduced almost exactly a year ago, and it appears to be similarly problematic, despite the ruling of Justice Karki's Supreme Court. There are also reports of bribes and corruption throughout the judiciary as well, so they haven't rooted that problem out completely, although it's hard to know just how serious that problem is, and I can't comment on that. So where does this take us in the future in Nepal? Well, some structure for judicial independence exists there in the Constitution, but the integrity and good faith of the actors in this scenario has not always arisen to the occasion. The UN and other NGOs are complaining that the new transitional justice bill violates international law and the rulings of the Nepal Supreme Court, and they seem to be going ahead anyway. That bodes really ill for the rule of law in Nepal if the political forces are overwhelming the judicial checks on exercise of political power. So we have some serious doubts about the future of judicial independence and the rule of law in Nepal. We're watching, hoping that people will step up in important roles there in the political establishment and in the judiciary in Nepal to preserve judicial independence and the rule of law in that country. Thank you very much.
Very contributing. Thank you, Trevor. So, presentation by Professor David Pimentel. Our next speaker is Dr. Norman Rayat, the founder and convener of this Global South Network organizing today's talk. Norman held positions at a variety of institutions before he came to Leicester. He's now a lecturer here at Leicester Law School and is going to talk to us about judicial leaders in uncertain times, lessons from Pakistan. And Norman, as my local colleague here, I would suggest we keep the talk to 10 rather than 15 minutes in order to be able to complete on time. if that's possible.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming, all members. Thank you everybody who is online. Thanks a lot. Special welcome to you, sir. Welcome to Leicester. Welcome to Leicester Law School. It's part of the campus. It's an honor to have you guest speaker in our panel discussion. I'll keep it together to 5 minutes as a host organizer, to accommodate question and answers. Anything I miss, you can follow up on that or send me a question, begin question and answer session. So I will, when it comes to judicial leaders, let's start with the US and forget about Pakistan. Because when we talk about countries, authoritarian and hybrid regimes, people start saying, just like in one of the slides by Professor David, he used this word for Western like me, it's not judicial independence, it's the other way around. Let's start with the US. There is one very famous case, Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. And the Chief Justice Earl Warren. Now, this is still, in every academic work regarding racism or whenever there's talk about that, segregation, this case is always cited and analyzed and discussed. But nobody knows how they reached the decision, how the unanimous decision, all the judges within the US Supreme Court reached that decision. And as per Chief Justice Earl Warren's memoirs, published in 1977, page 281 to 286, he himself confesses that actually it was a divided decision, and I had to convince my colleagues to reach a unanimous decision. Second case, 1979, another book by Woodward and Scott Horner, and the title of the book is The Brethren Inside the Swiss, regarding the tapes scandal during the President Nixon's time, and the Chief Justice of Warren paper. Self says, well, actually, the decision was divided, but he had to come up with an opinion so that all the judges can be convinced to make a decision in favor of the regardless of that, Nixon had already made up his mind he's not going to comply with it. Now, what's my point? My point is that when it comes to judicial leaders, the first characteristic we need to look for is how that person leads the judiciary within the judiciary. If that ability convinces to lead rather judges one way or another, if that person has got them. Now, take a flight. Let's go to Israel. What was happening in 1990s during the time of Aaron Barak? The person who has led this Israeli Supreme Court challenged the authority through different socioeconomic ties. I don't want to get into detail because I have probably 2 minutes. Another flight. Let's go to the Mexican jurisdiction. 2 years ago. It's a very recent past. Chief Justice Zeldua, way beyond life addresses, engagement with the media, influencing their representatives, enforcement of socioeconomic rights, challenging the government directly. Another flight, let's go to Hungary, Solyon. Same case, challenging the authorities, enforcement of socioeconomic rights. But Solyon is an outlier case, by the way. He was the most unpopular judge in Hungary, in the history of Hungary, despite the fact that he managed to enforce the socioeconomic rights. But the way the liberal jurisprudence and the purposive approach he took in Hungarian tests, it was very unpopular with the Hungarian people. Now, let's come back to Pakistan. Before 2005, we have 3 military interventions, 3 big C constitution, 3 small C constitution. Small C constitution means the provisional constitution introduced by the military dictators. But right after that, certainly we have a Chief Justice with the name Iftikhar Mohammad Chaudhry, who didn't go to that extent to which Aaron Barak went, or Zeldua went, or US Supreme Court movement, but we went to other areas of life, beyond law, other areas of life, using the combination of administrative and constitutional powers given in the Constitution and legislative powers, try to influence, engage with the people. When I say people, different groups of society, including but not limited to civil society organizations, media, the opposition political parties within the political sphere, and managed to not only make decisions that were against the authority of military, government, ultimately brought about a constitutional amendment in shape of 19th constitutional amendment, which clearly states in that in law, it is stated that we are enacting this law as a result of the result of Pakistan Supreme Court judgment. This suggests the lessons which we can learn. That these constitutions matter to some extent, but it's not only the constitution, and it's not only the court itself. Some individual judges, the way they lead the court and interpret the constitution, a combination of strategies they use with regard to the engagement with the society, politicians, media, that equally matters. And that is the reason that during their tenure, constitutions become effective. Socioeconomic rights are enforced, and they are gone before them. After that, same constitution, same provisions, same powers, but nothing is done. That's it. Thank you very much. Any question you can ask me, because we don't have time, so let's start the question and answer session.
Thank you very much. So we do have time for questions and discussion and answers. And so I invite people online as well as people in the room to raise their hands if they want to ask a question or make a comment. Yes, please go ahead.
To start with Professor Fizam said, our first comment, then I will ask some questions. Firstly, the professor said that the minority in India has a right to set up their own institutions. Professor, let's look other way around. Why they start applying for getting a minority institution that are getting proper rights in the institutions that were set up by the government? So the minority in India had something in their mind, or they were pressurized by the Hindutva extremism, especially after the Modi government, because we know that the Muslims and the Sikhs in Punjab are having enough problems with the Modi government. Now let's move towards my question. As we know, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India have similar sort of political struggles right now. As you said that as you mentioned the case of US, India and Bangladesh are moving more towards a single party rule that China has adopted, Chinese Communist Party. As Hasina Wajid in Bangladesh, we have seen what she had done with the institutions in Bangladesh, and same with the Modi. It's becoming, in the case of Pakistan and India, both are becoming more religiously extremist. At one side, Hindus are crushing their minority. On the other side, in case of Pakistan Muslims are going towards an extremism as well. So how you see that? Because when it comes to a politics, constitution can go through a lot of changes. Because if there would be a single party rule in India, that would be horrible for the minorities, and diversity management would be crushed by that. And same in Pakistan, it's not the single party rule, but it's more of the authoritative rule. I am a Pakistani as well, but I can feel that, and I can believe that there is a military rule over there, and in Pakistan and in India and Bangladesh, it's more of a single party rule. So how you see that? Because then the constitution can be served more.
Yes, please go ahead.
So two responses. One, within our constitution, we have individualistic rights. So the civil and political rights, right to equality, freedom of speech, right to life, freedom of religion, all these were given. Now, there is no space available for the cultural communities to flourish. And we cannot allow one cultural community to have a space in the public square. Therefore, to create that public square, we said, well, you can establish and administer your own educational institutions. And if aid is needed, the state will give the aid. At times, it is giving the 100% aid. So that is the whole logic, that the individualistic rights at times are not enough for the culture to flourish. Because if I need to play Holi, I need my people with whom I will play Holi. If I need to speak my language or want my religious festivals to be held, I can't be holding them in state institutions, in the general institutions. But if I say religious instruction I have to give, of course, it has to be voluntary. I can give it only in a minority institution. I cannot give them in the non-minority institution. That was the reason why minority institutions are required, not because they were discriminated in the state institution, because anti-discrimination law will equally apply on them. Now, two, it is really wrong to say that we are going towards one-party rule. Our ruling party recently lost election in 2 provinces, in Karnataka as well as in Telangana. Number of Indian states are ruled by the opposition parties. So nationally, you may say that right now you are having a domination of one party. We had a domination of one party for over 4 decades, but that really did not go against the interest of the minorities. On the contrary, if you see, there are schemes of the current government at the grassroots level which have benefited the minorities. For example, Prime Minister's scheme of giving houses. Many Muslims in rural areas, large number of them, because they are poor, Muslims constitute a major segment of people who are living below poverty line. They have got those houses. They have got benefit out of the health scheme which the Prime Minister has launched. And Muslim women, for instance, because the Prime Minister brought in the Triple Talaq law, many of them quietly are voting for the BJP. And that's why in some Muslim-dominated constituencies also BJP is able to make some inroads. So it's not a right comparison, between Pakistan and Bangladesh, because the domination of Awami League in Bangladesh seems to be almost complete, with big question marks on the free and fair elections. On the other hand, we largely have free and fair elections, with some questions repeatedly raised about the electronic voting machine, but same voting machine in some states have given opposition power as well. India's constitution on minority rights is to be seen in the historical circumstances in which it was done. So if you look at the kind of debates we had in the Constituent Assembly, and even prior to that, before the declaration by Mountbatten that country is going to be partitioned, and what you see afterwards, you will get a different kind of picture. So if partition could have been averted, the rights of minorities would have been at a different level. But since we failed in retaining, today's Bangladesh and Pakistan, post-partition, there was some very strong voices within the Constituent Assembly, both against federalism as well as on the minority rights, because they thought that giving too many rights to the minorities may lead to further partition of the country, and there will be demands of secession. I am entirely in agreement with this theory that those who do not manage diversity well, and those who do not accept the autonomy of regions and don't go with federalism, eventually end up with partition. And our case is very much, consistent with this line of argument. Now, having said that, in that situation, where they could have declared India to be a Hindu Raj, the decision that India will not be a Hindu Raj, though what secular was not there, But certainly we were far more secular before 1976 when we formally inserted that word in the preamble. And therefore we need to look at that the current political party has been saying that appeasement of none, justice for all. And therefore they are not for the minority rights conceptually, but they say that Congress has been doing the appeasement. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the Sacha Committee report, that Muslims are almost there where you have scheduled caste, and therefore this whole appeasement argument falls down.
I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I have to intervene here,
okay.
but just simply because of timing.
Okay.
But this is a very important and interesting conversation, and I would suggest that we continue it. And to thank our speakers very warmly for wonderful presentations. Everybody who unfortunately couldn't ask questions, and encourage you to continue with the conversation, and just also to remind everyone that the Global South Network has another meeting, another session today at 3 o'clock in this room. So thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.